Dames en heren, goedemiddag.
Hoi hoi, hello and welcome to the Meet Maastricht podcast. I'm Katrina and together with our resident local Lucy, we will be exploring some of the amazing stories that make Maastricht so special. So sit back, relax and join us as we learn about our favourite Dutch city. Hello everyone and welcome to episode 37 of the Meet Maastricht podcast. I'm Katrina and we are back to our regularly scheduled programming with Lucy. It feels like we haven't done a normal podcast for ages. What are we talking about today?
I thought we'd make a tour of the market, and because we generally discuss one particular building and then explore all the stories connected with that particular spot, even if there have been earlier buildings, and then of course digress in whichever direction we want to. But in the series of Maastricht Silhouette, number 76 is dedicated to the banking buildings on the market, and that of course is sort of a deviation from the theme. It looks at an entire row of buildings adjoining a public space. So I thought it would be nice to approach it like that, because it gives an opportunity to talk about an open space like the market and the way that came into being and was used, and it gives you the possibility to talk about a whole row of buildings, and that's the western wall, so to speak, of the market square.
Is that the direction it faces?
It's the row of buildings that face the entrance to City Hall.
Yes, that's what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
Okay, and so where do we start? When they were built, or a bit about the Markt, or up to your discretion, Lucy?
Yeah. I will start by in the part of the story where the market as a space in the city is gaining relevance.
Okay.
What you have to imagine here is that the first time medieval Maastricht built itself a wall in the 13th century. This wall went diagonally across the space that we now know as the market square. So that is very different, of course, as everything in that time. A good 700 years ago, as everything in that time was very different from what it is like today. But there was an open space there, but it was not as large as the present day market is, and it was encompassed, so to speak, by this first city wall, of which there is nothing left to see at that particular spot. I mean, quite close by, you can still find remnants of that wall at the backside of the houses on the Grote Gracht.
Yes.
So if you walk into the loading bays of the theatre, you are looking on your left-hand side at the inside of that 13th century wall.
Okay.
Of course, that is not really exactly public space, but yeah, no one's going to yell at you if you simply walk into that space for a bit and then walk out again. But if you continue on that line, you will get a sense of how that wall would have gone on in the easterly direction towards the river.
Okay.
And then adjoining that wall, sort of built up right against it, was the large cloth hall. Of course, Maastricht became very much a city after the year 1000, because more and more people would settle there, produce marketable goods, and get into international trade and commerce, and of course and organize themselves in guilds, and every guild would have its particular trade or its particular product. And in Maastricht, two of the main ones were woolen cloth and leather.
Okay.
And so the large guild hall of the cloth guild was against the wall on the open space next to the wall.
Yes.
There was always an open space and there was always a big building, but all of it together looked very different from what it is today.
Yeah.
And more or less on both sides of that large cloth hall, there were city gates, so they would lead you out of the city.
Mm-hmm.
So of course an open space will be used for trading, and it will be used for meetings, and it will be used for celebrations, and those are pretty much things that have remained connected to this space until the present day. Just look at 1,000 years and pretty much the same things are going on. Maastricht still has a market day on Wednesday and on Friday, and there'll be fresh produce, vegetables and fruit and fish. Especially on the Friday, there's a large fish market, and there'll be cloths, although of a very different kind from the type woven in the Middle Ages.
I was going to say it's quite nice that there is still a huge amount of fabric and textiles being sold on that market, sort of a nod to its history.
Yeah, and there's and you can buy dairy products, cheese, of course, and there'll be a butcher or two in a mobile cart, and you can get all sorts of foods and drinks. Mm-hmm. And of course, all of that is very similar to what it has been like for centuries. But there's also there are big differences. They are no longer selling live animals.
No.
There are no spaces where wood is being sold or coal.
I feel like the municipal cleaning crew are probably very, very grateful that there's no big wood trucks and no big animal livestock things coming in.
Yeah, exactly. And the way it is set up now, with all these pretty looking stalls that are covered, that was also only partially so in the earlier days. And a really big difference is that it used to be so that pretty much everything that was for sale, especially all the fresh produce, would come from the immediate surroundings of the city.
Yeah.
So the farmers from St. Peter and Heugem and Heer, they would walk into the city, with their wicker baskets and with their little carts drawn by dogs.
Oh.
And they were really big dogs often.
I was going to say, were they large dogs?
Yeah. Well, my grandfather was a farmer is not the right word, because he was producing small quantities of a large amount of products, and we have a different word for that in Dutch. A small holding and a large variety, and and this is of course what the permaculture hype of today is returning to.
Yeah.
That's more or less what my grandfather did.
Okay.
And he had this before he could afford to buy a horse and a cart. He had a much smaller cart and a very large dog. There's a picture of my mother and her twin brother as toddlers on the back of this dog.
Yeah.
And the children pretty much disappear behind the head of the dog.
Wow.
So,
Big dog.
Big dog, really big. Not all of them were, and of course, quite a few of them had miserable lives, as you can imagine. It has always been the case that in humanity, some people are kind and some people are not, and of course, not all dogs were treated kindly. I think that with whatever stayed the same on the market, it being there and it being in pretty much the same spot, pretty much everything else characterizing the market has changed over the centuries. And what you also have to realize is that the market on the square that is still the market today was
Yes.
by far the only place where trading was going on. I mean, there were, and you can see that by the street and place names all around the city.
Yeah.
There is a wood market, and there is a fish market, and there is a
Okay.
there used to be a pig market, and these are all street names of existing streets.
Yeah.
But the markets that used to be held there for wood or fish or pigs, they are long gone.
Yeah.
And with some of those spaces, you even think, well, there's so very little space here. How did they manage to have a market here? But they did.
I know when we went to Gouda, they had the large warehouse. And did Maastricht have a warehouse in that similar sense where they would weigh things for the trading?
It must have had, yes, but there is one I know of in a sort of corner right off the Our Sweet Ladies Square, but that was specifically for wool.
Right.
The woolwaag. Of course, in Gouda. Yeah, impossible to pronounce for English speakers. I know that. Gouda is famous for its cheese, so they would have a waag, scales. That's what a waag is, scales, a weighing machine. Theirs would mostly weigh cheese, but of course Maastricht, producing so much wool, would have a waag, scales that were particularly used for wool. But there were probably more.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it's just because it's such a prominent building in Gouda.
I do know there is a wool waag, so a wool scales, and of course that is the same industry. It was the cloth that was being produced was made from wool. So it's the same guild that would have had those scales of Our Sweet Ladies Square. Okay. But there must have been more, of course. Yeah. And of course everybody was using hand scales at the time as well.
Yeah.
The stuff that you the little piece of equipment that you can still see in most depictions of Lady Justice, with the sword in one hand and scales in the other.
Yes.
Well, that used to be a piece of equipment that pretty much every commercial business would have, and of course the farmers just as much as everybody else. Oh, but just one last remark about the market as a phenomenon in the city. So places where all kinds of products were being bought and sold, and them in the Middle Ages especially having been spread out all around the city. There are two features there that are still worth mentioning. Of course, quite a large volume of trade was on the river. It is something we tend to not think of in these contemporary times, but of course the river was a highway, and there were boats plying up and down, and they were carrying freight, and they were docking in Maastricht.
Yeah.
And a very important right the lords of a city or territory could grant that city or territory would be what is called in Dutch het stapelrecht. I'm not sure how you would call that in English, but it is permission being granted by the Lord, or the obligation being announced by the Lord, that every ship coming in was obliged to unload their cargo at that particular place.
Okay.
Which of course turns it into a market right away.
Yeah.
That's what happens when you do that. That was the point of doing that. You stop the traffic. They may have to pay a fine or toll simply, but they also may be obliged to unload, and then there would be buyers.
Yeah. Okay.
And then you have trade in that spot, and then other people are attracted to that and start offering their wares, and and that is how markets come into being. And of course, that is what was going on the banks of the river here as well, and that is why places like the Houtmaas and the Wisselsmaas are on the bank of the river.
Right.
It was trade coming off the boats. And the other thing is that I've pointed this out before, but it is important to remember those walled cities can make the impression that there was a very sharp distinction between urban life within the city and country life outside the walls. But that's not really what life was like most of the time. Of course, during sieges, it would be very much like that.
Yes.
Yeah, well, Maastricht has been under siege a lot, and there have been atrocious massacres by attacking armies in Maastricht in the course of the centuries as well. But of course, most of the time it would be peace and people would be going about their business. And the second wall around Maastricht, which made the part of the wall crossing the Markt totally obsolete, as all the rest of the first wall, that second wall of the 14th century was drawn so wide that there was all sorts of, green stuff within the wall, open spaces. There would be gardens and there were orchards and there were places where in the orchards you'd also have the pigs rooting about, and you'd have small fields with some sheep, and there would be grassy spaces that were used to put the white linens out to bleach them in the sun.
Okay.
That's where the name blekerij comes from. It is a bleaching field.
Okay.
Yeah, they must have alternated that carefully with the sheep, but yeah.
Yeah, don't want to get the wrong week on your bleaching sheet.
I don't know how that worked, but it must have worked somehow. So there'd be a lot of this country stuff going on outside the walls, but at the same time there'd be a lot of city stuff going on outside the walls. People would be living there. There'd be workshops there, especially of the smelly kind that they preferred not to have within the walls.
Yes.
Leather work was not particularly. Having to soak the hides in urine and stuff like that. Yeah, not popular. And ever since very early in the Middle Ages, there were very strict regulations for all sorts of activity going on. And a very good example of that was the wood cellars, the wood market, forever being located next to a pool. So a place where there would be water. And this was a policy that was very stringently adhered to down the centuries to reduce the risk of fire.
Very practical.
Yeah, of course, this is also something that doesn't come to mind right away, but so the wood market would be first within the walls and then outside the walls and then even further afield, but still adjacent to a pool. So, there'd be water right away. So by the end of the 18th century, there was this enormously intricate system of guilds as organizations with their rights and their duties, and the city as being carefully administered with regulations for production and sales of all kinds of goods and everything. And then the French Revolution happened, and the French revolutionaries stormed into the city and everything was abolished. So the old order being abruptly ended by the French Revolution, also being applied here, was not only closing the churches and abolishing the convents, it was also putting an end to city life as people had known it for centuries. And of course a new order was established, of course, and quite a bit of that streamlined things, but it must have been a shocker all the same.
Yeah. So did the French Revolution affect the guilds then as well?
Oh yeah, they were abolished.
Yeah. Okay, so why were they in particular abolished?
Well, they were also seen as an instrument of privilege.
Okay.
And if your rallying cry is liberté, égalité, fraternité, you will destroy everything that hampers the freedom, equality, and brotherhood. And of course, the guilds being seen as too exclusive with all their requirements for membership. Of course, that was to the French revolutionaries. That was something similar to a convent.
Yeah. I guess I've always probably incorrectly seen them as almost unions and to protect workers and to help them work together, but I guess if there are specific rules and you have to be able to join, and I'd never thought of them in that way, but that makes sense.
Yeah, but you are absolutely right. They did fulfill that function. It was ensuring the rights of the members. It was ensuring the quality of the product, which of course is something that has totally disappeared since industrial production has taken over.
Right, but it was seen as sort of exclusionary because it was.
Yeah, and of course over the centuries, the guilds, both the members individually and the organizations in their totality, of course, became, not in all cases, not everywhere, not all the time, but as a societal feature, they became a power, a force that could not be ignored. I mean, they were causing revolutions. They were taking over city governments. They were economic powerhouses. And thanks to the Wool Guild.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah. Anyway, I think that'll do when it comes to market as a space and as a function.
Yeah.
Except for one last remark. When you have all this open space, you can use it for all sorts of things. So, and of course, what hasn't changed is that we for hundreds of years it's been a party space. Of course, once a year, Prince Carnival will be declared there. But all kinds of parties were customary, and I think even more so than today. And of course, the most obvious ones being the fairs. And there used to be the fairs used to be connected to the day of a patron saint of a particular parish. So there were lots of small fairs all around the city. But eventually they were concentrated on two spaces, the Market and the Vrijthof. And now we have only got one left, and it is on the Vrijthof. Okay. And then twice a year, the spring one in the middle of May, which is still connected to the parish, really, because it is the Servaas Kermis. So on May 13th is the day of St. Servaas, and that is also the week when the spring fair takes place on the Vrijthof next to the Servaas, and the other one is in the late summer. What you also use squares for is military parades, and when Maastricht was still a garrison town, of course, that was going on, where you have a large square with the city hall on it. You will, of course, use the space as well to have the great receptions for important guests. So when Peter the Great of Russia was in the city, he was there was a celebration there, and when Queen Wilhelmina came here, there was a great celebration there, and that's what you use it for. And also, of course, lastly, it is the place where you have the public executions.
Oh.
Yeah. The court and the jail were in the city hall on the Market for quite some time, and there's this large space. So.
And how were people executed? Was there a spot like a gallows or anything?
Yeah. They would put up a gallows. Yeah. And the last time except of course under French rule, then they used the guillotine, and that might have and in earlier days people would be beheaded with a sword, and then you'd have to pray for someone who could wield that expertly.
Yeah, and a sharp sword as well.
Yes, exactly. So the gallows were an improvement on that, and the guillotine was definitely an improvement of that. But when the French were kicked out, of course, the guillotine wasn't used anymore either. No. But I think they kept it in the Dominicans church for quite some time.
Oh,
I don't
gosh.
know. I don't know what happened to it.
I'm sort of glad that it's not still there in the just browsing, having a coffee.
Oh dear. No, the last execution in 1860 was done with gallows. So.
Okay.
All right. Well, of course, we could go on for a long time, but I think it is time to talk about the spatial history of the stuff, which of course I've done to some extent by mentioning the first city wall, crossing it, and the second city wall being further out. But of course, the next episode in that story is, of course, the first city wall and the cloth hall being demolished in order to build the new city hall, which is the one we know now. It was built in the 17th century and by an architect from Holland. So it is in the style of the Renaissance in Holland. It is not a southern style. We don't mind, obviously. That's That's just what happened. It was they put down the first stone in 1659. Both lords, or both representatives of both the lords of Maastricht were there. And in 1664, it was ready to be used. So it is a completely 17th century creation, with sumptuous decorations in the rooms of the mayor and the aldermen. But the bottom part of the building has also been used, as I said earlier, to imprison people, and there would be it would also be used as a courthouse to judge those people.
Yeah.
And of course that's no longer the case. There is a separate courthouse. I don't even think we've got a jail anymore in Maastricht. Last remark about the present day city hall. There is a central hall within the hall that is called the square, het plein, and it was always intended to be a public space. You know, as I said before, they when there was still the cloth hall, the guilds and the city administrators would come together outside the hall and meet, you know, and have their public conversations. And the fact that in the new city hall in the 18th century there was this public space envisioned within the building is a continuation of that type of behavior. You know, just civic duties. And of course, the entire word civic comes from the Latin word for city, if I'm correct. And the next big thing, it's rather striking that this is only the 1930s. You know, so we go from the middle of the 17th century to the first half of the 19th century. So things remained pretty much unchanged for quite some time.
Yeah.
But in the early 19th century, or early 20th century, of course, what became more and more of a nuisance was traffic, and it was traffic that led, or the increase in traffic, which led to the next great reconstruction of the market when they decided to put the Wilhelmina Bridge where it is today.
Okay.
There have been even more disastrous plans than that one, which met so much resistance that they were never carried out. But the way the Wilhelmina Bridge has been conceived and built is also pretty disastrous. Because, of course, what happened is that from the riverbank to the market, an entire block of medieval 16th, 17th, 18th century houses and buildings was just flattened.
Wow, okay.
Yeah. If you go and stand with your back to City Hall facing the river, that's looking east. Facing the river, it's looking. You see now a contemporary building, Museeforum.
Yeah.
That was only built in the 20th century, so it is very recent.
Yeah.
And it is a sort of half-failed attempt at filling up the horrible hole that the Wilhelmina Bridge made in that part of the city.
Yeah.
After the bridge was constructed in the 1950s and 60s, they on the empty space on both sides of the bridge they put large office buildings for the tax office and for other parts of the municipal administration, and there was even an underground tunnel connecting one of those offices with City Hall. I'd like to know if that is still there, because I don't know if it is.
How exciting. secret tunnel.
Yeah, it had come up in that clothes shop now. So, this
Ah.
anyway, so where there is now Museeforum,
Yeah.
that's where the bridge would connect from the riverside to the market, and
Yeah, wow.
that's how all the traffic would come roaring across the bridge and into the city onto the market. About
Okay.
a hundred city buses every hour and everything else as well. And
Yeah.
they wanted to put an end to that and reduce pressure of the traffic on the market. So now it is, you are hardly allowed in as motorized traffic,
Yeah.
and it's being led. Well, you can't even cross the bridge, I think, as a regular car now.
I'm not sure. It's hard for me to imagine there being a lot of traffic there because it is such an open, pedestrian friendly
Yeah,
space.
it is now, but it used to be two-way traffic from the
Wow.
market straight to the river. And
Okay.
with the building of Museeforum and the splitting of the bridge head in two parts, and putting the motorized traffic on deviations, that is how they reduced the pressure of motorized traffic on the market, because it had become unbearable.
Yeah.
And on top of that, for decades, the market has served as parking space.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that there was this sea of cars,
Yeah.
and then there was the roar of traffic and the exhausts and everything. Just unpleasant. Just really,
Yeah. Okay.
the car is king kind of attitude. Okay, which brings us to the buildings that the little booklet by Maastricht Silhouette calls the Bankgebouwen, the banking buildings.
Yeah.
They were not built as banking buildings, of course.
Okay.
They were built as, well, first off, there has been an older row of houses there, as is pretty much the
Okay.
case all around the old town, and especially within the confines of the first wall. There were houses there, of course, and then in the course of time, things were changed. Things were torn down, or buildings were two houses became one. At times there'd be a very thorough reconstruction. At times only the front on the street side would be
Yes.
changed. They devote a good 10 pages describing all the restructuring, restoring, refurbishing, redecorating, remodeling a row of about 5 houses on the market. And they now are, all of them, beautifully patrician houses. And they quite a few of them were inhabited by some type of nobility in the 17th and 18th century, but we know most about their history in the 19th and 20th century. And you see that in the 19th century they were usually bought by the new commercial class in Maastricht.
Okay.
So the entrepreneurs, traders, industrialists, quite a few of whom would come from outside the city and just make their fortune here. Like, for instance, a family that started with the first bonhomme to come to Maastricht. Bonhomme is not an unusual name in Maastricht, but of course they are not originally from Maastricht. Like, most of us really go back 2 generations, and most of us are not from here on all sides of the family, as is the case pretty much everywhere else. But anyway, this first bonhomme, he had the job of taking care of the coach service, both delivery of post and transport of people. For a long time was of course done by horse-drawn carriages.
Yes.
Coaches. Later they became buses, of course, but at first this was carriages with horses. And he took that job in Maastricht, and he did very well. with that. But of course, once the fossil fuel generated industrial revolution took hold, the horses became abolished, and steam engines took the place of the energy supplier in transport, and then Bonhomme went into steamboats. And they applied regular services of steamboat connections on the river. Yeah. So it's this type of people. Quite a few of them inhabited these beautiful mansions on the market.
Okay.
So this is not the class that was even richer of the big industrialists like the Regoux, who would build landed estates outside of the city. These people in the 19th century would live inside the city and in these lovely houses. And quite a few of them got pretty palatial on the inside.
Yeah.
And by the looks of their fronts on the market, they still look like very comfortable spaces to live in. And the next thing that happened to these houses is they were successively becoming office buildings for the bank. And this is a story all by itself that I won't go into in depth because it will not do the subject justice. But banks started in the 19th century as a way of helping the poor. So it was something that middle class people and often the type of families I just described, people well versed in commerce and trade, it was something they thought of as a type of charity to help people avoid the worst effects of poverty.
Yeah.
And as a substitute, not as a substitute, but to provide for structures that now our social security laws provide for. So before there were pensions, state mandated pensions. We have a general old age pension in the Netherlands, which is for everyone, regardless, only connected to your age and you living on the territory of the kingdom. But of course, none of those laws are particularly old. And before that, people got old and incapacitated or fell sick or whatever. And there was really nothing to provide for that except charity from the church or from well-meaning fellow citizens who were better off. And banks were started in the 19th century in this particular form to help people save.
Yeah. Okay.
So these are the beginnings of local banks, and the local bank of Maastricht, with all kinds of vicissitudes over the decades, had been housed in the city hall for a long time. So there was a bit for the prison, and there was a bit for the market master, the guy who would do all the inspections and kept order on the market, and there was a part for the bank.
Okay.
And people would come and bring their nickels and dimes there and put them in their accounts. And for decades, this sort of trundled on happily. Of course, not doing a great deal. I mean, when you look at the amount of people putting their savings here and the amount of their yearly income, that's laughable by today's standards. Yeah. But of course, we know what happened after the Second World War. Most of the financial transactions became cashless. Most of the people managed to, escape the poverty that was so prevalent before all the social security legislation started. And at the same time, on the business side, there was this enormous extension of the services. Mortgages, for instance, all kinds of loans. So these banks were no longer the simple piggy banks for the proletariat. They became large service industries, which at the same time, and this is especially something of the last few decades, became increasingly centralized. So it has not been Maastricht's bank for a long time. It became first part of a Limburg bank, and after that a part of the South Netherlands Bank.
Right.
And now, of course, it is part of a national conglomerate, which is still pretty special, since most of the banks are now international mammoths.
Yeah.
But it is SNS is the bank that still provides a tiny bit of service on the market.
Okay.
Is still a Dutch bank. It is still in Dutch hands, and it's pretty extraordinary for that. But all the services are now digital. Everything is cashless. There are just 2 cash machines on the market because, of course, on the market most payments are still in cash.
Yes.
And this is a reduction from they had the SNS Bank had 4 of those great mansions at one time, and that was all their offices and their service center and their how do you call that, a place that has extremely thick walls and doors and where the valuables are kept.
Like a safe?
A safe, yes, exactly. And the safe is still there because it was too expensive to take that out. And what they've done in the 21st century with all these empty offices in all these formerly grand mansions is pretty terrific, I think. It's a project that the municipality and the university together tried to roll out across the old town, where more and more buildings were being deserted by the families who used to live there, and only the commercial space on the ground floor was continued in use. Most of the shopping center streets of Maastricht are empty real estate.
Yeah.
And the municipality and the university together tried to turn as much space as they could manage above these shops into living spaces for people.
Yeah.
And the former banking buildings on the market is one of the few places in which this has worked. Okay. So all the not the ground floor, but all the floors above that have been restructured into studios for students, for single or 2 people households. And of course you can't access them from the market. All these places have their accesses at the back, so in the back streets. Yeah. But at least they are being inhabited, and at least they are being taken care of, and at least people have a roof over their heads in a pretty spectacular spot.
Yeah. And does someone have the safe in their house?
No, it's no, it's in the cellar. The only other things in the cellar are the washing machines and the bicycles. But yeah.
I had a friend in Australia who lived in an old bank, and in one of their rooms they had one of their rooms was a huge safe.
Yeah.
So
you could do that. Yeah.
Because it's just easier than trying to move them.
No, but that's exactly what happened here, and it's and every time you hear about the reconstruction of a former bank building, there will be that we left the safe. Yeah, okay, surprise.
Okay, well. Yeah,
I think that's it.
Have you decided what we're going to talk about next time?
I am looking at that right now. I think we'll do something similar. Talk about an area, and we'll stay in the same area, and that will be talking about the Boss Street.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we have been talking about St. Matthew's Church, and now we've talked of the Markt, and we have also talked about the Eiffel Building, which is at the end of the Boss Street and in Bassin. But I think it'll be nice to talk about the Boss Street and all the buildings that are there and all the changes that they went through.
Yeah.
We also talked about one of the nuns' convents that was first there. Yeah. But okay, then this one will put all those separate pieces into a larger whole.
Good. Another piece of the puzzle.
Yes, definitely.
Thank you so much for listening to the Meet Maastricht podcast. To keep up to date with all our content and events, make sure to follow us on social media. You can find us on Instagram at Meet Maastricht and on Facebook at Come Meet Maastricht. If you love our podcast and would like to see some amazing archival images as you listen, don't forget to subscribe to the Meet Maastricht YouTube channel. If you love what we do and would like to support the Meet Maastricht team, you can also donate through PayPal via our website meetmaastricht.eu. Meet Maastricht is definitely a labour of love, and all of the revenue we make through our tours and events currently goes towards administration costs. With your help, we would love to be able to give back a little something to the team so we can all keep bringing you our favourite stories and showing you our favourite places in Maastricht. Thanks again, and tune in next time to learn more about our beautiful city.
Tot ziens.